So I'm going to split this video up into parts. The first part of the video, even if you've never seen Better Call Saul, never watched Breaking Bad, you can still watch because I'm going to talk about things in a very general way. If you do watch Better Call Saul and you just saw the episode and you want to talk about it, I'll put a timestamp in the comment section. Just skip ahead to there because that's going to have all the specifics about the episode that just came out. So with both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, it seems like on the surface, it's a similar story of a somewhat decent person, Walter White in Breaking Bad or Jimmy in Better Call Saul, becoming slowly more and more of a monster as things go on. But I think there's a huge difference with Walter White. It's common knowledge, I think, now that there were these traits that always existed, and as he became more and more this alter ego Heisenberg, he was really being a more authentic person and actually living truer to who he really was deep down. Now we get this great photo for season 4 of Better Call Saul that I think is showing that this evil monster cartoon Saul Goodman that we see in Breaking Bad wasn't really Jimmy deep down. This wasn't him living authentically. This was actually him taking on this cartoonish persona because he couldn't bear letting people down anymore. He'd hurt so many people by saying he was going to change, saying he was going to be a better person, and really did want to. But then when he slipped up, he always hurt people so much. And eventually you get the sense Jimmy decided the best way I can not hurt anybody anymore is I'm just going to advertise that I'm this clown, I'm this sleazeball, and that way people are never going to expect any goodness from me, and therefore I can never let anyone else down. And so much of the guilt that Jimmy feels, it stems from his relationship with his brother Chuck. Now, this is a great example of, I think, the one major lesson that both of these shows are trying to drive home, and it's this idea of fairness. Now, Chuck, he was the good brother. He always did things the right way. He was always solid. Jimmy, not so much. But we get this heartbreaking scene where Chuck and Jimmy, their mother is dying, and Jimmy actually leaves her deathbed. Chuck stays, always the good brother, and with her dying breath, she actually says Jimmy's name. And it's just this cosmic unfairness and injustice, and it can't help but remind you of the story of Cain and Abel. Now, the creator of the show was raised Catholic. This is the second story in the Bible. He surely knows it, and it just reminds you so much. Abel, he's a shepherd, just tending to the sheep, and Cain, he slaves away as a farmer, in some sense puts a lot more sacrifice, and his contribution is in some sense better than Abel's. But when they both give their offerings to God, God smiles upon Abel and doesn't respect Cain's sacrifice for no reason. No justification is given. It's just somewhat unfair, and it's very interesting that, and we know that Cain kills his brother. We see Walter White, who's obsessed with fairness and the way things should be and getting recognized for his brilliance. We see where things end up with him. He dies hated by everyone, including his son, including his wife, and we see what happens to Chuck, who is so obsessed with fairness that he'll sabotage his own brother because he can't bear that his brother will get things that he had to work for, and his brother will just luck into them. He's so obsessed with fairness. We see how being obsessed with fairness, it'll just absolutely drive you crazy. And I feel like on Breaking Bad, they tried to communicate this point, but Walter White was such a compelling figure, some of the critique didn't quite land with a large part of the audience and the people that watch. So I feel like on Better Call Saul, they tried to do a do-over, and they gave this same obsession with fairness, but they gave it to less of an anti-hero, more of just a tragic, sad character in Chuck. And I think the point was communicated better, but the show hasn't really taken off. It's been very acclaimed. It's been renewed for yet another season, so it's doing quite well critically, but the ratings just haven't quite been there. So in some sense, you've made the message clearer, but you've been able to reach far fewer people. It's just one of those trade-offs, and why it's very hard sometimes with art to really communicate your ideas. Even if you really you want to communicate them, there's all these trade-offs, and you got to try to kind of find the balance of the best way to make the idea clear so it doesn't get lost, but also appeal to the most number of people possible. Getting into the actual episode, we'll leave Jimmy's storyline for last. We'll start with Mike, who has a weird arc. I don't know how long they're going to play out this arc with him, where before he was worried about putting his name down as security consultant for legal reasons. He was worried about being implicated in crime. Now he seems more concerned about putting his name down as security consultant for a place that has bad security. And it's this weird old school work ethic that doesn't let him just sit back and take proceeds from crime. He would rather actually be a part of a criminal organization because he's still doing a good job, commanding respect, making sure everyone's chipping in, even if the business is monstrous. It's kind of weird. It reminds me a bit of Walter White when he was so obsessed, one, with not taking charity and he had to earn everything himself, too obsessed with purity and standards and excellence, even in the worst possible businesses. So it's an interesting turn with Mike. I just feel like for him, remember, he took money as a cop. He was a dirty cop, and it ended up getting his son killed somewhat indirectly. You'd think he'd be so opposed to crime and corruption, never doing something like that again. It just seems weird that he just keeps getting himself more and more involved. I guess partly it's his daughter-in-law. He feels so guilty. I still don't know what kind of a read to get on her. Remember, she was the one who she kept thinking she was hearing gunshots, and it never ended up being anything. So she's, in some sense, seems just very spooked by the violence that's around her, and Mike feels this weird need to just provide for them and maybe move them out into a better area where they never have to worry about violence again. But just a weird arc. I did like how at first he thought he was going to stick out like a sore thumb, but he integrated himself very well into the environment, has that little deadliest warrior debate about Muhammad Ali versus Bruce Lee, signs the birthday card, instantly commands respect. He says his name, Ermintrout, which I love. I want to do a supercut someday of all the times they've said Ermintrout on the show. So I don't know. That was my least favorite storyline. Moving on to Gus. Of course, Gus is the consummate professional. He just thinks that now that Hector is down, someone else is going to strike the Salamancas, and being the consummate professional businessman, he's just worried about this being chaos, having violence. This brings heat and police attention and limits profits. So he's just always about just efficiency, and it'll be interesting to see. We know from teasers that there's going to be some conflict and some violence. And it's interesting with Gus versus Walter, it was this conflict between Gus, just ruthless, efficient, and Walter was more emotional, prideful, unpredictable. I loved last season we got a taste of Gus versus Hector, where Hector is one of these old crime families. He didn't like how he had to compete with Gus, and he had to earn things on his own merits and on his own excellence. It was more about him using intimidation and loyalty to his family and kind of this earned privilege that he'd accumulated, versus Gus is just all about just excellence, standards. So it'll be interesting to see if we see more of that as kind of just the American business model versus in some other parts of the world is kind of the older, more family ties, patronage system. So that'll be interesting. Got to get to Jimmy's storyline. So we open the episode with another Cinnabon flash forward. Gene is very not good under pressure. So I guess we knew this before, but he is absolutely terrified. And for someone who's an ex-con guy grifter, is very not doing a good job keeping a low profile, is kind of sticking out. So it made me think that maybe these aren't just going to be flash forwards, and potentially going forward we could get a lot more story within this Gene time period, which would be interesting because all the stuff we see now with Jimmy, we know where it ends up. So there is that element where we don't have that unpredictability. It would be really interesting if we spent a lot of time seeing Gene, and maybe he could even start to date, build a life, kind of build an ordinary life, and maybe even achieve some kind of happiness. Or maybe not. Maybe all we're going to get is these little snippets just to kind of show, like the end of Goodfellas, just how the end when crime doesn't work out, and then you just live this kind of miserable, sad existence. So that was interesting. Howard was really hateable this episode. I don't know why. He doesn't really do anything wrong, but he's just very, very tone deaf. He inherited his position. He's never really had to work for everything. Things just kind of work out for him. So he's just a very hateable character, even though he doesn't really do anything wrong. Some interesting shot stuff when he's listing off Chuck's accomplishments on the phone. They first did a very far away shot, then another far away from a different angle, and there were 3 different shots where he was kind of in the corner of the frame. It's just interesting. I'm not sure if that was just a stylistic thing or if they're trying to communicate anything. Jimmy looking through the want ads, I didn't get to pause and see what exactly each position was. Someone can comment if they know which position, but it seemed kind of haphazard, like he wasn't really well suited for any of the jobs. Him being cheerful at the end, absolutely terrifying, because if you remember from last season, he was the one who got the insurance onto HH&M, and he was the one that now is indirectly, he feels he's responsible for Chuck's death. So Jimmy, deep down, he's a really good guy, really wants to do good in the world. Finding that out, it's gonna devastate him. We'll see the fallout from that. Didn't get much of Kim. I'm sure that'll be changed in the future. I guess overall thoughts on the episode, I'm always just impressed by, for a show with so much pressure after Breaking Bad, to just create this epic show that everyone's going to watch and rave about. Like, there's so much pressure for them to just step on the gas, for them to just consistently be so patient with things and let things develop so slowly and organically and tell these small stories. I'm always impressed, none more so after this episode. Can't wait for next episode. I'm curious, comment whatever you want, but if you have watched Breaking Bad or haven't, want me to talk about it more, don't want me to talk, that would be a really helpful comment, because sometimes I assume everyone who likes Better Call Saul and is a big fan loves Breaking Bad too. I could be completely wrong. Maybe there's some people who are big fans of Better Call Saul, but for whatever reason didn't like Breaking Bad. So if that's the case, and that's the most of the people watching these videos, I'll try to keep the Breaking Bad stuff to a minimum, but I don't get a lot of chance to talk about Breaking Bad, so I'd love to do the opposite. So comments about that would be really helpful. Yeah, I'm gonna watch the 100 finale tomorrow. Doubt there's much crossover between the people still watching this video and the people that are gonna watch that video, but I hope so. And yeah, maybe I'll do some kind of channel update later in the week, because I'm gonna hopefully upload way more frequently. I finally got things kind of figured out as far as video editing goes, so yeah, I might do a video kind of just updating and let you know why I haven't been updating that frequently, but I never know how to end these. I'm just going to end it.